All right, 120. You've just completed making an agarose gel, or you've just completed watching the video for making an agarose gel. Now I'm going to give you some tips on how to load it. I'll refer you to your lab manual, or lab handout I should say, to make sure that you're labeling or keeping track of what wells contain what samples. You're going to be running this with a couple of lab mates, and so you want to make sure that you don't lose track of whose sample is whose in the gel. So you'll have a little table in your lab handout, and make sure you just write your names in that table as to whose sample is in what position. So you're going to be loading a DNA ladder, a marker, that will kind of run alongside your samples in one of the wells, in the first well, first being the one that's furthest to the left. And then from there on out, you will load your plasmid preps. And so with this, I've seen in the past students challenged by this, just in that it takes a steady hand. But what one of the first things I'm going to tell you about is how to use two hands to kind of help steady the pipette tip and make sure that you load your sample without stabbing the gel or tearing the well. So, with your tip loaded, what I recommend students do is actually put both elbows on the table, get your eyes directly over the wells, and then use both hands, one with your finger steadying the end of the pipette, the other on the pipette trigger, and just lower carefully, once you've sucked up your sample, lower carefully your pipette tip over a well. Now, because we're actually adding sample buffer to our samples, you don't need to bury the tip all the way into the well in order to load your sample. The sample buffer is actually going to make your sample and the DNA therein heavier than the buffer that is in our gel tray, or our gel housing here. So it's just if you get the pipette tip over the well and push your sample out, your sample will fall into the well. So let me just illustrate that using our dry erase board here, give you a sense of what I was talking about. So looking down on a well, you're going to see a rectangle. And what I was mentioning is that you don't need, or you can bring your pipette over your pipette tip and just get it over a well. And what you're going to need to do is get it then into the buffer that is in this gel housing. But you don't need to bury the pipette tip all the way down to the bottom of the well. If we're looking at this now side on, you don't need to stab the bottom of the well. Rather, if you just have your pipette tip in the buffer and over a well, and expel your sample will fall down and fill the bottom of the well. And that's exactly what we want. So those are just a few tips to help you make sure you load your sample correctly.